What if I prove to you that your greatest difficulty today, whether financial, emotional, or related to health, is not an external problem, but a technical flaw in the way you observe? That question isn't meant to impress you. It's meant to slow you down. Because right now, before anything actually happens, your mind is already deciding what this moment means. Most people believe they are seeing reality clearly. In truth, they are looking through layers of habit, memory, and expectation, and calling that vision normal. It feels comfortable, familiar, safe, but it is also incomplete. Are you ready to abandon the comfortable and false version of your life to understand what is operating behind the scenes? Not by believing something new, but by noticing something simple. As you listen, notice your reactions. Notice how quickly your mind agrees, disagrees, or drifts. That noticing is not passive. It is the beginning of a different relationship with reality. Once it starts, you won't see things the same way again. There is a quiet trick the mind plays that keeps life feeling repetitive, even when everything around you changes. You wake up, and before the room comes into focus, a story is already running. It sounds like you. It feels familiar. It says, "Another long day," or "Nothing really changes," or "Here we go again." That sentence appears so quickly that it feels like truth. But it isn't the present speaking. It's memory speaking, dressed up as now. Most people think they are living in the moment. In reality, they are living inside a recycled interpretation of yesterday. The body opens its eyes, but the perception hasn't woken up yet. You don't see the light coming through the window. You see your responsibilities. You don't hear the morning sounds. You hear the echo of unfinished conversations, bills, expectations, and pressure. The day hasn't even started, and yet it already feels heavy. Not because it is heavy, but because it has been pre-labeled. This is the illusion of continuity. It creates the sensation that life is one long, uninterrupted line, when in truth it is a series of fresh moments that never repeat. What repeats is not reality. What repeats is the way you look at it. Notice how often you say, "This always happens to me," or "I know how this will end." Those statements feel logical, even protective. The mind believes it is saving energy by predicting. But what it is really doing is filtering perception. Instead of meeting what is here, you meet what you expect to be here. And expectation is not observation. Expectation is memory wearing a disguise. Think about how many times you have walked into a room and instantly felt bored, tense, or defensive without anything actually happening yet. The reaction didn't come from the room. It came from a stored image of what similar rooms have meant in the past. The body responds as if the threat or disappointment is already confirmed. Muscles tighten, breathing changes, attention narrows. And just like that, the present moment is replaced by a projection. This is why days feel like loops. Same emotions, different faces, same frustration, different situations. You are not responding to what is unfolding. You are responding to a mental summary of what you believe always unfolds. The mind prefers this because it feels stable. Familiar suffering feels safer than unknown neutrality. But look closely. Has today actually proven itself to be exhausting yet? Or did that conclusion arrive before any evidence? Has this conversation truly gone wrong? Or did your body brace itself before the first sentence was even finished? When you slow down enough to notice this, something subtle but important appears. There is a gap between what is happening and what you assume is happening. That gap is usually invisible. It gets covered over by speed. The mind rushes to define, to judge, to label. Once labeled, the moment is no longer alive. It becomes part of a story. And stories repeat themselves because they are closed systems. Reality doesn't repeat. Stories do. This is not about positive thinking or pretending everything is new and exciting. It's about precision, seeing how quickly perception gets replaced by interpretation, seeing how the past quietly negotiates the present without asking for permission. You may notice that when this happens, the body reacts before you consciously choose anything. A sigh, a tightening in the chest, a subtle irritation. This is important. The illusion of continuity is not just mental, it is embodied. The body has learned patterns and executes them automatically, as if it were following a script written long ago. And here is where something critical begins to form. If you are not actually seeing what is here, then your reactions are not responses to reality. They are responses to memory, which means much of your energy is spent fighting ghosts, defending against echoes, and solving problems that are not fully present. This realization can feel unsettling at first. It challenges the idea that you know your life, but it also opens a door. Because if the sameness you feel is not coming from reality itself, then it is not as solid as it seems. There is a moment, often brief, when you can catch the mind in the act of assuming. Right before the reaction completes itself, right before the emotional charge locks in. That moment is usually missed because the habit of reacting is faster than awareness. And that is where the next layer reveals itself. Because once you see how the present is being replaced by memory, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens when you react before you truly observe? Once the present is quietly replaced by memory, something else slips in almost unnoticed. Reaction. Not a thoughtful response, not a conscious choice, but a reflex. It happens fast, faster than language. A look, a tone of voice, a delay, a message that feels off, and the body reacts before you have time to see what actually occurred. This is the hidden danger most people never question, because it feels natural. It feels like life itself. Reaction gives the impression of strength. It feels decisive, alive, even honest. But look closer. When you react, you are not acting from clarity. You are being acted upon. The external event pulls a lever inside you, and something fires automatically. Words leave your mouth that you did not examine. Emotions flood the system without invitation. Energy drains not because the situation is severe, but because control has quietly changed hands. Every reaction is a small surrender. In that moment, your inner state is no longer yours. It belongs to whatever triggered you. A colleague's comment, a stranger's behavior, a news headline, a family member's silence. They become the authors of your internal weather, and the cost is higher than it seems. Because when this happens repeatedly, your nervous system learns a dangerous lesson. That peace depends on external compliance. Most people live this way without realizing it. They say, "They made me angry," or "That situation stressed me out," without noticing the assumption hidden inside those phrases. The assumption is that the outside has authority over the inside. Once that belief is installed, life becomes a battlefield of constant defense. You are always bracing, always preparing to be disturbed. What makes this especially draining is that reaction feels justified. Someone interrupts you, and irritation seems reasonable. Someone criticizes you, and tension feels appropriate. But justification does not equal freedom. A prison can be logical and still be a prison. Every time you react automatically, you reinforce a pattern where the world decides how you feel, and you spend your energy trying to fix or control what is outside of you. There is something even more subtle happening beneath this. Reaction collapses time. It pulls the past into the present and projects it forward. You are no longer dealing with what was just said or done. You are dealing with everything similar that has ever happened before. One comment carries the emotional weight of 10 years. One delay becomes proof of an old story. The reaction is never proportional, because it is never just about now. This is why reactions feel so intense and so convincing. They are fueled by accumulated memory. The body responds as if survival is at stake, even when the situation is minor. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, attention narrows. In this state, observation becomes almost impossible. You don't see clearly because the system is busy defending. Here is the real danger. When reaction becomes the default, awareness weakens. You stop noticing what you are doing internally. Life becomes something that happens to you instead of something you participate in consciously. Decisions made in this state often feel urgent, absolute, and emotionally charged. Later, they are often regretted, not because you are flawed, but because they were not made from presence. If you watch closely, you may notice a small but important gap that appears just before a reaction fully takes over. It's brief, a fraction of a second, a subtle tightening, a flash of emotion, a bodily signal. Most people miss it because they identify with the reaction instantly. They believe this is me, but that gap is not empty. It is awareness knocking quietly. When that gap is missed, reaction completes its cycle. Words are spoken. Energy is spent. The body remains activated long after the situation has passed. And then comes exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the deeper kind that comes from constant inner conflict. This is why reacting before observing is so costly. It doesn't just affect one moment. It shapes your sense of self. Over time, you begin to believe you are your reactions. I'm just an angry person. I'm sensitive. I get stressed easily. These identities form without question, even though they are built on unexamined habits. But something interesting happens when you don't immediately react, even once. The situation does not collapse you. The emotion still appears, but it is seen. And in that seeing, a new position begins to emerge. You are no longer completely inside the emotion. There is a slight distance, not cold, not detached, just clear. This is the beginning of a shift most people never experience. Because the moment you notice the reaction, instead of being swallowed by it, another presence becomes visible. A quieter one. One that is not rushing to defend or attack. One that can watch what is happening inside without needing to interfere. And that raises a question that changes the entire structure of experience. If something in you can observe the reaction, then what exactly is the one that reacts? When you begin to sense that something in you can notice a reaction, a quiet separation starts to form. It is subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. Yet this separation changes the entire geometry of experience. Until now, life has felt like something you are inside of, something that happens from the center of your chest outward. But in this moment of noticing, a new position appears. You are no longer only the one inside the emotion, you are also the one who sees it. Most people never make this distinction. They live as the character, fully identified with every thought, every feeling, every impulse. If sadness appears, they say, I am sad. If anger rises, they say, I am angry. The emotion and the identity fuse into one. There is no space to question, to observe, or to breathe. The experience feels total, absolute, and personal. But observe carefully what actually happens. A sensation arises in the body. A thought follows it. A story forms around both. None of these require a self-image to exist. They simply appear. The idea of me comes later, as a label placed on top of the experience. When this is seen directly, something loosens. You begin to realize that the suffering is happening, but it is not all of what you are. Imagine watching a film so intensely that you forget you are in a seat. The images pull you in. The emotions feel real. Your body reacts. For a while, the screen disappears. Then, suddenly, you remember. You are watching. The movie does not stop, but your relationship to it changes instantly. The fear loses its grip. The drama softens. You regain perspective without rejecting the experience. This is what happens when the observer becomes visible. The character continues to think, feel, react, and struggle. Nothing is suppressed, nothing is denied. But the observer does not drown in the experience. It notices. It names without judgment. There is tension here. There is a wave of sadness. There is a story forming about what this means. This language is not cold, it is precise. And precision creates freedom. The character wants relief. It wants resolution. It wants to be right, safe, and understood. The observer wants clarity. It does not rush. It does not argue. It does not need to fix what it sees. It simply remains present. This difference matters more than it seems, because the moment you fully identify with the character, every emotion feels like a command. Every thought feels like a fact. When the observer is active, emotions become information instead of orders. Thoughts become events instead of truths. You don't need to push them away or analyze them endlessly. You see them as weather moving through the system. Temporary, dynamic, not personal in the way you once believed. This does not mean becoming distant or passive. In fact, it allows for more intelligent action. The observer gives you a stable reference point. From there, responses can emerge instead of reactions. Words can be chosen, silence can be used, energy can be conserved. You may notice that the observer is always calm, even when the experience it watches is intense. Not calm as in numb, but calm as in grounded. It is not trying to improve the moment or escape it. It is simply aware. This is why people often describe a strange relief when they first touch this perspective. The pain may still be there, but the suffering decreases. Something is no longer fighting itself. Here is an important detail that is often misunderstood. The observer is not a new personality you create. It is not a technique you perform. It is already present. It has been present your entire life. Every time you said, "Why did I react like that?" or "Something in me knew this wasn't right," the observer was speaking. It just didn't have the microphone. When the observer steps forward, the sense of identity begins to shift. You stop defining yourself exclusively by your roles, your emotions, and your stories. You start to sense yourself as the space in which those things appear. This is not philosophical, it is experiential. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. Yet this new clarity introduces a subtle tension, because if you are not just the character, then the way you have been interpreting reality may not be as solid as it once felt. Patterns you took personally begin to look mechanical. Reactions you believed were inevitable start to look optional, and then something unexpected begins to happen. As the observer remains present, you start noticing small irregularities in how reality responds. Moments that don't fit the old script. Coincidences that feel strangely precise. Gaps where the usual cause and effect logic seems to bend. It's as if a fine crack appears in the surface of reality itself, inviting a deeper look. At first, it doesn't feel dramatic. There is no loud sign, no sudden revelation. It feels more like a hairline fracture in something you assumed was solid. Small moments begin to stand out in a way they never did before. A phrase you hear twice in one day. A thought you were just having spoken out loud by someone else. A situation that aligns too precisely with a question you didn't say to anyone. You notice them, and for a second, the usual explanation doesn't arrive fast enough. Before, these moments passed unnoticed or were dismissed instantly. Just a coincidence. It doesn't mean anything. But now, something is different. You are present enough to actually see them, not through excitement or belief, but through attention. And attention changes the texture of experience. This is the crack. Not in the world, but in the way you thought the world worked. When the observer is active, reality no longer feels flat. Cause and effect stop looking purely mechanical. You begin to see patterns forming not because they are mystical, but because your focus has shifted. What you attend to organizes itself differently in your perception. It's like adjusting the lens on a camera. The scene doesn't change, but what becomes sharp does. You may notice that these coincidences often appear around moments of decision or inner conflict, times when something in you is undecided, open, or questioning. It's not that reality is sending you messages. It's that your awareness is no longer locked into one narrow channel. You are picking up more signal and less noise. For most of your life, attention has been scattered, pulled by urgency, emotion, and habit. In that state, reality feels chaotic, random, overwhelming. But as observation becomes cleaner, patterns that were always present become visible, not as answers but as feedback. This is where people often make a mistake. They rush to interpret. They assign meaning too quickly. They turn observation into belief. That closes the crack just as fast as it opened. The power is not in deciding what it means. The power is in noticing that something is happening without forcing a conclusion. There is a quiet intelligence in this phase. You begin to see how your inner state and outer experience move together. When your attention is reactive, reality feels dense and resistant. When your attention is open, reality feels responsive, not obedient. Responsive, as if it meets you at the level you approach it. Think about how different people can be in the same situation and have completely different experiences. Same job, same city, same relationships. One feels trapped, another feels curious, one feels attacked, another feels challenged. The environment didn't change, the observer did. This doesn't mean you are controlling reality. That idea creates tension and disappointment, What is happening is more subtle. Your observation filters what becomes relevant. And what becomes relevant shapes the decisions you make without you noticing. Over time, those decisions create outcomes that feel external, even though they were quietly guided by where your attention rested. When you see this directly, something clicks. You realize you are not as separate from your experience as you thought. The boundary between inside and outside becomes less rigid. Life starts to feel participatory rather than confrontational. At the same time, this awareness brings responsibility, not the heavy kind, but the honest kind. You can no longer pretend you are just a passive victim of circumstances. You start to notice how often you feed certain patterns with attention while starving others. You see how drama survives on focus and how clarity grows in silence. This is why the crack can feel unsettling. It removes comfortable excuses. It shows you that much of what you experience is reinforced, not imposed. And while this is freeing, it can also be uncomfortable. Because if your attention matters, then unconscious attention has consequences. Many people sense this and instinctively pull back. They return to distraction. They fill every gap with noise. Because seeing this clearly means you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing everything just happens to you. But if you stay with it gently without trying to use it, the crack widens just enough to let in a new level of understanding. You begin to notice that when you ignore this awareness, life becomes heavier. Resistance increases, friction grows. The same problems repeat with more intensity, as if reality is raising its volume. This is not punishment, it's pressure. Pressure created by misalignment between what you are now capable of seeing and how you are still living. And that pressure doesn't stay subtle forever. At some point, ignoring what you notice stops being neutral. It starts to cost you. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, in ways that are easy to explain away. Fatigue becomes normal. Tension becomes your baseline. Decisions feel heavier than they should. You tell yourself this is just how adulthood is, how life works. But beneath that explanation, something else is happening. When awareness increases and action doesn't follow, friction appears. It's like driving with the parking brake slightly engaged. You can still move forward, but everything requires more effort. The body carries the strain first. Sleep becomes lighter. Breathing stays shallow. Small irritations feel disproportionately draining. You may not connect these symptoms to perception, but they are linked. Living without conscious observation doesn't mean living blindly in the dark. It means living on autopilot while believing you are fully awake. You go through conversations, commitments, and decisions without really being there. Later, you wonder why the results feel off, why things don't quite align, why satisfaction remains out of reach even when goals are met. This is what quiet blindness looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as normal life. The danger is not that you make mistakes. Everyone does. The danger is that you make important choices from inherited patterns rather than present insight. You choose relationships because they feel familiar, not because they are nourishing. You accept work conditions because they match an old self-image, not because they fit who you are now. You invest time, energy, and emotion based on assumptions you haven't examined in years. Over time, the gap between who you are becoming and how you are living widens. At first, this gap shows up as restlessness, a sense that something is slightly off. Then it becomes dissatisfaction, then resentment. If still ignored, it often turns into crisis, emotional burnout, physical symptoms, sudden life changes that feel unavoidable. People often say these moments come out of nowhere. They don't. They come from a long habit of not listening. The body is usually the last messenger. Before it speaks loudly, there were subtle signals, a tightening when you said yes instead of no, a heaviness when you walked into certain environments, a quiet relief when you imagined a different path. These were not random feelings, they were information. But information requires attention to be useful. When you ignore these signals, you don't escape them, you store them. And stored signals accumulate as tension. The nervous system stays in a low-grade state of alert, preparing for threats that never quite arrive. This is exhausting, not because life is attacking you, but because you are not aligned with what you already sense to be true. There is also a psychological cost. Blindness makes you argue with reality. You insist things should be different while continuing the same behaviors. You explain away patterns instead of questioning them. You defend choices you no longer fully believe in. This inner conflict drains clarity and confidence. Eventually, reality increases the pressure, not out of cruelty but out of feedback. When subtle cues are ignored, stronger ones appear. Conversations become confrontations. Delays turn into losses. Minor health issues become chronic. The system is trying to get your attention in the only language it has left. This is why awareness without action can feel uncomfortable. Once you see, you are invited to respond. Not dramatically, not impulsively, but honestly. And when that invitation is repeatedly declined, the cost grows. Many people misinterpret this phase. They think life is punishing them. They think they are unlucky. They think something is wrong with them. In reality, they are experiencing the consequences of living disconnected from their own observation. There is a strange relief in seeing this. It means you are not broken. You are just out of sync with your awareness. And synchronization doesn't require force. It requires listening. The moment you stop resisting what you already notice, the pressure begins to ease. Not because problems vanish, but because you are no longer fighting the signals meant to guide you. And then something unexpected happens. In the space where constant tension used to live, a quiet stillness appears. Not dramatic, not euphoric. Just a pause. A moment where the mind stops pushing and the body stops bracing. That pause, though brief, reveals something important. Beneath the noise, beneath the pressure, reality itself is not demanding. It isn't hostile. It doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be seen. When the pressure eases even slightly, the first thing you notice is not excitement. It is relief. A kind of quiet that doesn't come from solving anything, but from not pushing against what is already here. For a moment, the mind stops narrating. The body loosens its grip, and in that pause, something becomes obvious in a way it never was before. Nothing is wrong in this exact instant. This is difficult for many people to accept because they are used to measuring life by tension. If there is no problem to fix, the mind feels lost. It starts searching immediately, scanning for something to improve, judge, or prepare for. But if you stay just a little longer in that quiet, without filling it, you discover something unexpected. Reality, when left alone, is neutral. The stress was not in what you were experiencing. It was in how you were labeling it. Silence doesn't mean the absence of sound. It means the absence of unnecessary commentary. The moment you stop calling an experience good or bad, success or failure, progress or setback, the emotional charge weakens. The situation remains exactly the same, but your relationship to it changes completely. Try to remember a moment when you were fully absorbed in something simple, watching light move across a wall, holding a warm cup in your hands, listening without planning your response. In those moments, the sense of self often softens. Time feels different. There is no urgency. Nothing needs to be added. That is not because the moment is special. It is because you are not interfering with it. Most suffering is not created by events. It is created by the constant mental friction applied to events. The endless evaluation, the comparison, the story of how things should have gone. When that friction stops even briefly, the system resets itself. This is why silence feels restorative. It returns you to direct contact with experience, not the story of it, but the raw data. Sensation, color, temperature, movement, breath. In this mode, the mind doesn't disappear, it just stops dominating. It takes its proper place as a tool, not a ruler. There is a subtle but important discovery here. You realize that peace is not something you create. It is something that appears when you stop disturbing it. This goes against everything most people have learned. They try to think their way into calm, manage their emotions, or control their environment. All of that effort adds more noise. When you simply look without naming, something settles. Not because you are doing it right, but because you are not doing anything extra. The body understands this immediately. Muscles soften, breathing deepens. The nervous system shifts out of defense mode. This relief is often brief at first, The mind quickly returns with new labels. This won't last. I don't have time for this. What about tomorrow? That's normal. The habit of noise is strong, but even a few seconds of silence leave a trace. They show you what is possible. And once you know this state exists, you begin to notice how rarely you allow it, how often you interrupt your own experience, how quickly you rush to define, judge, or anticipate. This isn't a failure, it's awareness becoming sharper. Silence also reveals something else. Without labels, many of the things you thought were unbearable lose their intensity. They may still be uncomfortable, but they are no longer overwhelming. Pain becomes sensation, fear becomes energy, sadness becomes movement. The suffering was in the resistance, not in the feeling itself. This doesn't mean withdrawing from life, it means meeting it directly. When you stop labeling, you stop fighting. And when you stop fighting, energy becomes available again. You are no longer wasting it on internal arguments. But this clarity introduces a new challenge. Without constant commentary, expectations begin to collapse. The plans, the timelines, the mental contracts you made with life start to loosen. You notice how much of your stress came from trying to force reality to match an image you were carrying. Silence exposes this gently but clearly. It shows you where you were gripping, where you were insisting, where you were pushing against the current instead of noticing where it was already moving. And once you see that, you can't help but ask a new question. If so much tension came from expectations, what happens when you stop demanding that reality follow your script? When expectations loosen, there is often a brief sense of disorientation. The mind is used to running ahead of life, predicting outcomes, preparing defenses, rehearsing victories and disappointments. Expectations give the feeling of control. They make the future feel manageable. But they also quietly dictate how the present is allowed to appear. Most frustration comes from this invisible demand. Reality must confirm the picture in your head. You expect people to behave a certain way. You expect effort to lead to specific results. You expect timing to follow your internal clock. When these expectations are met, you feel justified. When they are not, you feel wronged. But in both cases, you are not actually meeting reality. You are measuring it. The moment silence enters, this measuring starts to break down. You notice the gap between what is happening and what you thought should happen. That gap is where tension lives, not in the event itself, but in the comparison. Expectations turn life into a negotiation that reality never agreed to. You bring terms, conditions, timelines. Reality brings movement. When these don't match, the mind interprets it as resistance. You push harder. You strategize. You try to control what cannot be controlled. And the more you push, the more exhausted you become. Letting expectations collapse does not mean giving up. It means releasing the fantasy that you know how things must unfold. It means trading rigidity for responsiveness. This is not passive, it is precise. When expectations fall away, you begin to see the actual shape of the moment, what is available, what is blocked, where energy flows easily, and where it doesn't. Before you were trying to break down walls because your plan told you there should be a door there. Now you notice that the door is somewhere else. This shift changes how effort feels. You stop wasting energy on resistance. You stop arguing with circumstances. You act where action makes sense and wait where waiting is intelligent. This doesn't come from discipline, it comes from seeing clearly. Many people fear this collapse because they believe expectations are what keep them moving. Without them, they think they will become lazy or directionless. In reality, the opposite often happens. When you are no longer dragging the weight of imagined outcomes, your actions become lighter and more effective. You respond to what is real, not to what you hoped would be real. There is also an emotional honesty that appears. Without expectations, disappointment loses its edge. It still arises, but it doesn't turn into bitterness. You don't take it personally. You see it as information. Something adjusted, something revealed. This is especially important in relationships. Expectations are often unspoken contracts. You should understand me. You should change. You should want what I want. When these contracts are broken, resentment grows. But when you observe without expectation, You see people as they are, not as roles in your internal script. This doesn't mean you accept everything. It means you make decisions based on reality, not hope. The collapse of expectations also exposes a deeper truth. Much of what you called control was actually fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of not knowing, fear of losing identity. Expectations create the illusion that you are ahead of life, when in fact you are trying to outrun discomfort. When you stop doing that, uncertainty remains, but it feels different. It becomes open instead of threatening. You don't need to fill it with predictions. You can meet it moment by moment. This doesn't make life predictable. It makes it navigable. And something else becomes clear. Many of the obstacles you believed were external begin to look strangely familiar. The same conflicts, the same blocks, the same emotional reactions, repeating in different forms. Without expectations to distract you, a pattern starts to emerge. You begin to notice how often you are meeting yourself, not the situation. How the same internal beliefs shape what feels possible and what feels impossible. How certain challenges keep appearing, as if life is pointing at something you haven't fully seen yet. This realization can be uncomfortable, because if the pattern is consistent, then maybe the obstacle is not random. Maybe it isn't bad luck, or difficult people, or unfair timing. Maybe it is something you have been carrying quietly, shaping your experience from the inside. There is a moment when the pattern becomes impossible to ignore, not because it is dramatic, but because it is consistent. Different situations, different people, different contexts, yet the same emotional knot keeps appearing. The same frustration, the same sense of being blocked. At first, the mind looks outward for explanations, circumstances, other people, timing. But when observation stays honest, another possibility quietly presents itself. What if the obstacle is not in the way of your life, but part of the way you have been living it? This is not an accusation, it is an invitation to see more clearly. The mind prefers to believe obstacles are imposed. That belief protects identity. It keeps the story intact, but it also keeps the pattern alive. Every belief you carry acts like a filter. It doesn't just shape how you interpret events. It shapes which events you notice, which ones you engage with, and which ones you ignore. Over time, this creates a reality that feels external and fixed, even though it is continuously being reinforced from the inside. Think about a belief you've held for a long time, something subtle. I have to work harder than others. People can't be trusted. Nothing comes easily for me. These are not just thoughts, they are lenses. Through them, the world organizes itself. You are drawn into situations that confirm them. You react in ways that reinforce them. And when they are confirmed, the belief feels proven. This is how an obstacle is built. Not in one moment, but through repetition, unconscious repetition. The most difficult people in your life often play a specific role in this process. They seem to trigger you in the same way, over and over. It's tempting to label them as the problem. But if you look closely, you may notice that they activate a very particular response in you. A response that feels old, familiar, almost rehearsed. They are not causing that response, they are revealing it. When observation deepens, you begin to see how you participate in these dynamics, not by choice but by habit. You see how quickly you assume intentions, how fast you defend, how often you expect conflict before it appears. These internal movements shape the interaction long before words are exchanged. This is uncomfortable to see because it challenges the idea of innocence. But it also restores power. Because if you are involved in the creation of the obstacle, then you are also involved in its dissolution. This does not mean blaming yourself. Blame keeps you trapped in the same loop. It turns observation into judgment. What is needed here is neutrality. The same neutrality that allowed you to see reality without labels now allows you to see yourself without condemnation. When you look at an obstacle this way, something shifts. You stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to show me about how I relate to the world? That question opens space. It invites curiosity instead of defense. Often the obstacle exists to protect an old identity, a version of you that learned certain strategies to survive. Control, withdrawal, people-pleasing, resistance. These strategies once made sense. They solved problems, but they also solidified into patterns that now limit you. Life doesn't remove these patterns gently at first. It brings you situations that highlight them, again and again, not to punish, but to reveal. Each repetition is an opportunity to see what you are doing automatically. When this is seen, the obstacle begins to soften, not because the situation changes immediately, but because your position changes. You are no longer pushing against it blindly, you are studying it. And study dissolves illusion. This is where many people rush to change themselves, to fix the belief, to replace it with a better one. But that is just another form of control. The deeper shift happens when you simply see the belief operating without feeding it. Attention without judgment weakens old structures. As this happens, the sense of separation between you and the obstacle begins to fade. It no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a message you hadn't learned how to read yet. And as that message becomes clearer, something else starts to appear in your experience. Subtle alignments, easier moments, situations that resolve without effort. Not because you are forcing them, but because you are no longer reinforcing what blocks them. The pattern that once felt oppressive begins to loosen, and in its place, a different kind of order starts to show itself. A quiet synchrony between what you notice and what unfolds next. As the old pattern loosens, life begins to respond in a way that feels unfamiliar at first. Not spectacular, just oddly aligned. Things that once required force now seem to arrange themselves with less resistance. Conversations unfold more smoothly. Decisions become clearer without endless analysis. You start noticing that when you don't push, something still moves. This is the pattern many people sense but rarely trust. Synchrony doesn't announce itself as a miracle. It appears as timing that feels precise without being dramatic. You think of someone and they call. You stop chasing an option and another one presents itself. You release a worry and information arrives that reframes the entire situation. These moments are not new. What is new is your ability to see them without immediately dismissing them. When attention becomes consistent, reality begins to mirror that consistency. Not by obeying you, but by meeting you. There is a difference. You are no longer scattering your focus across fear, control, and expectation. You are present, and presence has a stabilizing effect. What you observe repeatedly gains weight in your experience, not because you believe in it, but because you interact with it. You give it energy, time, and responsiveness. What you ignore begins to fade, not as an act of denial, but as a natural consequence of non-engagement. Drama, when not fed, starves quietly. This is often misunderstood as passivity. In truth, it is precision. You are choosing where to place your attention instead of letting it be hijacked. This choice shapes your inner state, and your inner state shapes the quality of your decisions. Over time, those decisions create a life that feels more coherent. Synchrony becomes visible when you stop interrupting it. Many people sabotage this phase by trying to use it. They start watching for signs, expecting outcomes, turning observation into a strategy. The moment that happens, tension returns. The mind steps back into control mode and the natural flow stiffens. The key is subtle. You notice without grasping. You acknowledge without demanding. You allow patterns to appear without assigning them a job. When this balance is present, life begins to feel less like a series of battles and more like a conversation. You act, reality responds. You pause, reality adjusts. There is feedback, not domination. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. Challenges still arise. The difference is how long they last and how deeply they hook you. Without constant attention, problems don't solidify into identities. They pass through as events, not definitions. You may notice that certain issues you used to wrestle with simply stop appearing. Not because they were solved, but because you stopped giving them a stage. They no longer serve a function in your awareness. This is where the earlier realization completes itself. The obstacle was sustained by attention. The moment attention changes, the obstacle loses its structure. There is a sense of quiet empowerment here. Not the loud kind that seeks recognition, but the steady kind that trusts observation. You begin to move through life with less urgency, less need to prove, less need to explain. And yet, something curious happens. As synchrony becomes more apparent, you also become more aware of when it breaks. Moments when you fall back into old habits, when you react instead of observe, when you feed a story instead of seeing a fact. These breaks are not failures. They are indicators. They show you in real time how attention shapes experience. You don't need to judge them, you simply notice the contrast. This contrast sharpens your perception further. You start to feel the difference between aligned action and forced action in your body. One feels light and responsive. The other feels heavy and resistant. This bodily feedback becomes a guide, more reliable than thought. As this sensitivity grows, a final shift begins to form. You realize that observation is not something you do occasionally. It is the lens through which you live. And once that lens changes, it cannot be fully returned to its old setting. Reality itself hasn't changed, but the way you see it has, and that changes everything that comes next. Once this way of seeing settles in, even quietly, it becomes clear that you can't fully return to how things were before. It's not because life has changed, but because the lens through which you experience it has. You begin to notice how often perception shapes reality before reality has a chance to speak for itself. And with that noticing, a new baseline emerges. This new lens doesn't make everything brighter or easier. It makes things clearer. And clarity has a particular quality. It removes unnecessary suffering. Not all discomfort, not all challenge, but the kind created by misinterpretation and automatic resistance. You start to see how much of your emotional life was built on assumptions about people, about outcomes, about yourself. Through the old lens, these assumptions felt like facts. Through the new one, they appear as habits. Strong habits, yes, but still habits. With this shift, the world feels less personal. Not in a cold or detached way, but in a relieving way. Events no longer feel like constant commentary on your worth, your intelligence, or your progress. They are events, information, feedback. This alone frees a tremendous amount of energy. You may notice that emotions still arise, sometimes intensely. The difference is that they don't define the entire moment anymore. There is space around them. You feel anger, but you are not reduced to anger. You feel fear, but you are not swallowed by it. The observer remains present, steady, watching the movement without needing to interfere. This steadiness changes how you move through ordinary life. Conversations slow down, you listen more fully, you respond with fewer words but clearer ones. Silence no longer feels awkward, it feels informative. You notice how much is communicated without speech when you are actually paying attention. Even routine moments take on a different texture. Walking, waiting, working, eating. They feel less like obstacles between meaningful events and more like life itself. The mind still plans, but it doesn't dominate. It cooperates. What's most striking is how neutral reality appears through this lens. Not dull, neutral in the sense of open, full of potential but not demanding interpretation. This neutrality is what most people mistake for emptiness. In truth, it is spaciousness, and within that space, choice becomes possible. You begin to see how quickly the mind wants to turn experience into narrative, to decide what something means before it has fully unfolded. Through the new lens, you catch this impulse early. You don't suppress it, you simply don't follow it automatically. The story loses momentum when it isn't fed. This is where a quiet confidence develops. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that doesn't need to. You trust your ability to see, to pause, to respond when clarity arrives instead of reacting when pressure appears. The world hasn't become predictable. If anything, it has become more dynamic. But unpredictability no longer feels threatening. It feels alive. You are no longer trying to control the current. You are learning how to read it. You may notice that others sense this shift in you. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. Less friction, less defensiveness, more presence. This changes interactions without effort. You are no longer pushing against people or pulling from them. You are meeting them where they are. This lens also makes dishonesty, especially self-deception, harder to maintain. You see when you are avoiding something. You feel when a decision is misaligned. These signals are no longer vague. They are clear and immediate. Ignoring them becomes uncomfortable, not because of guilt, but because it disrupts coherence. And once coherence becomes familiar, you begin to prefer it. You choose it naturally, not as a moral decision, but as a practical one. Life simply works better when what you see, feel, and do are aligned. This is the quiet transformation that few people talk about. Not a dramatic awakening, not a new identity, but a subtle correction in vision. Like putting on the right contact lens after years of strain. You are still in the same world, but you are no longer seeing it the same way. There is a moment when you realize this shift cannot be undone, not because you decided something, but because you saw it for yourself. Once you notice how observation shapes experience, you can't fully go back to reacting blindly. You may still slip into old habits, but now you catch them. And that catching changes everything. This isn't about believing new ideas. It's about testing what you've already felt. The next time an emotion rises, pause for just a second. Notice it as if you were watching it happen to someone else. See what changes in that small space. That pause is where freedom begins. If this perspective resonated with you, write this sentence in the comments so I know you stayed until the end. I am learning to see, not react. And if this content spoke to you and you want to go deeper, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. They continue this exploration and help you train this way of seeing in daily life.